closer look at how political turmoil is impacting Burkina Faso's economy. The Central African Republic's leader returns to a capital hit by violence. And a new tourist attraction in China that's not for the faint of heart. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. 28 civilians, including women and children, were killed Wednesday in Russian airstrikes in Syria, according to claims by an opposition monitoring group. The airstrikes, which are Russia's first military action outside the former Soviet Union since the occupation of Afghanistan in 1979, appears to be the start of a long-haul commitment by the Kremlin to strengthen the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb has more.
The Russian Defense Ministry has released this video it claims is of airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria. Flood rights groups say Russian strikes killed at least 30 civilians near the cities of Homs and Hama, which are controlled not by the Islamic State, but by the Syrian moderate opposition. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter says the Russian position is contradictory.
This kind of action by the Russians is ill-advised and will backfire.
Russia maintains Wednesday's strikes hit Islamic State military equipment, command post, and vehicles.
Everything was said by the Russian Ministry of Defense. Don't listen to Pentagon about the Russian strikes.
Discord between Russia and the U.S. started before the strikes began. According to a U.S. official, a Russian general walked into the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, said strikes in Syria would start, and then requested the U.S. remain clear of Syrian airspace.
This is not the kind of behavior that we should expect professionally from the Russian military.
But Republican critics say this behavior is to be expected, considering President Obama's strategy in the region.
This administration has confused our friends, encouraged our enemies, mistaken an excess of caution for prudence, and replaced the risks of action with the perils of inaction. Into the wreckage of this administration's Middle East policy has now stepped Vladimir Putin.
Analysts say Russia's actions may push coalition nations like Turkey or Saudi Arabia to try to neutralize what they see as an attempt to strengthen Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
You may see these countries step up their own efforts on behalf of their preferred players in Syria in order to counteract what the Russians are doing.
The Pentagon says the coalition will continue anti-Islamic State airstrikes unimpeded in both Iraq and Syria. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
Now, the situation in the Central African Republic remains tense and uncertain. The country's interim president, Catherine Samba-Panza, returned home on Wednesday after leaving the UN General Assembly in New York early in response to the worst violence this year to hit the capital, Bangui. People have been rallying on the streets of Bangui, calling for the restoration of Central African Republic's national army. The army was sidelined after mostly Muslim Seleka rebels seized power in the mostly Christian country in 2013. Seleka stepped aside the following year under pressure from the United Nations and its former colonial ruler France, clearing the way for an interim government led by President Catherine Samba-Panza. Now, for more news and notes on the situations in Syria and the Central African Republic, VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bashir joins us live from the UN in New York. Margaret, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vincent.
Yes, now we started off with Syria. The Russians are very adamant that they are only targeting the ISIS positions. Why is nobody believing them?
Well, the Syrian National Coalition president was here yesterday at the UN, and he said that they're hitting Hama, which was freed of ISIL over a year ago. That area was liberated, and Homs, and also they've been hitting Hama, and so they're saying these are areas where ISIL isn't present. So how, by deduction, how can they be hitting ISIL? But as you said, the Russians say that they're going after ISIL and Jabhat al-Nusra.
Now, from what you're hearing around the UN, is this going to be possibly the beginning of a serious conflict or disagreement of those that are involved, all the countries that are involved in the fight against extremism in that region?
Well, I think there's concern because the Russian entry into this arena, into this area, is an escalation. You have a major military superpower coming into the conflict in Syria when everybody is trying to move it towards political talks. So there's a little concern over that. But the U.S. and the Russian foreign ministers, Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Lavrov, have met 3 times this week here in New York. They're on top of the situation, trying to keep communication open between the 2 superpowers. Minister Lavrov and Mr. Kerry met again last night, and Kerry said that the 2 countries would have military-to-military discussions very soon. We hear that they're happening today, some sort of a video conference between American and Russian military personnel.
All right, now let's move over to the other issue, that is Central African Republic, which looks like it is sliding back to chaos. What has been happening around the UN in relation to the CAR?
Yeah, it's a terrible setback for the CAR. They're so close to the end of the transition period this year. As you mentioned, the president flew back early from the General Assembly. Today, there was a special session on CAR, which had been planned prior to this. It wasn't because of this. The Secretary General chaired the meeting. It's a donors conference and discussion of the situation. And he expressed his deep concern that this could derail the political process. And he urged restraint by all parties, and he called for a halt to what he called this unacceptable violence that was triggered, as you know, by the killing of a young Muslim taxi driver. So the SG, the Secretary General, urged everyone to recommit to the process in CAR, to help with the elections that are coming up. There's a huge funding gap, as always. We're seeing at the UN constant funding gaps. For the CAR, they need $200 million for urgent programs and priorities. They only have about 100 million, a little over 100 million of that. So they were encouraging donors today to try and make that up, particularly on the election process. They want the elections to happen on time.
Very quickly, the interim government there is saying it needs more help from the UN. Is that the kind of help they're asking for, funding?
Right. So they're asking for technical funding, election funding, humanitarian aid. More than half the country is receiving humanitarian assistance. So it's a variety of things, also for demobilization and disarmament type programs, security sector reform, justice and reconciliation. These are all the areas that need to be funded. So donors were meeting today. So hopefully we'll hear some good news later in the day.
And you'll tell us more about that tomorrow. Thanks a lot, Margaret. Well, VOA's UN correspondent Margaret Bashir reporting live from New York. While political turmoil in Burkina Faso over the past year has taken a toll on the economy, the transitional government is reporting nearly $70 million in losses in the 10 days that followed a short-lived coup by members of the presidential guard early this month. While the crisis shut businesses and workers went on strike, Emily Eob reports on what a return to political stability can do for the country's economic recovery.
This market in Burkina Faso's capital city, Ouagadougou, is buzzing with activity again after recovering from a failed coup earlier in September that paralyzed the activity for more than a week. Ibrahim Ouadreogo is a hawker and says during the coup he could not work.
We couldn't go out to sell because soldiers were in the streets, so we couldn't go out of our homes.
The country's borders were closed for a few days. A lot of workers went on strike to protest the coup. Hélène Traoré Sanou works at a cotton company. Burkina Faso is the top cotton producer in Africa, and cotton is a heavyweight in the country's economy. Traoré says her business has not been affected by the recent crisis, but it will be if there is unrest during the upcoming presidential elections, which are due to happen later this year.
We have close to 900 trucks driving around the country to fetch the cotton, so we really need the roads to be functional in order to get the cotton to our factory.
This is the latest political crisis in months of turmoil in the West African nation. 1 year ago, massive protests ousted President Blaise Compaoré after 27 years in power. A transitional government was put in place in order to organize elections. Fiscal lawyer Daouda Diallo says these political changes have affected the trust investors had in Burkina and that upcoming elections are crucial.
New authorities will have to give some sort of guarantee to the international community, not only to help them decide to bring funds to Burkina Faso, but also to attract investors in order to take charge of the country's economy again.
Earlier this year, the IMF projected a 5% growth for Burkina in 2015, 2 points below previous projections. Emily Yob for VOA News from Ouagadougou.
Now, Burkina Faso's interim president, Michel Kafando, visited the recaptured barracks on Wednesday that were held by coup leader General Gilbert Diendérè's forces. Burkina Faso's government says it had started negotiations to persuade the leader of a short-lived coup to surrender after he took refuge in the Vatican's compound in the capital. For more on the situation in Burkina Faso, I'm joined by Bagassi Koura, a reporter with VOA's French to Africa service and a native of Burkina Faso. Bagassi, welcome to Africa 54.
Hi.
Yes. Now, tell me first, what is the situation like in Bangui as we speak right now?
In Ouagadougou.
In Ouagadougou.
Yeah.
Mixed up now, all these
things.
Yeah,
a couple of minutes ago we heard that finally General Diendérè has been arrested. Yeah. He has been handed over by the Vatican embassy to the transitional authorities, and right now he is in custody in Ouagadougou.
Okay, and he had actually offered to surrender, like, of course, they didn't have much option.
They've been having negotiations since he ran over there on Tuesday night, and I think Vatican wanted to make sure his right will be respected.
Yes.
They were also assured by the fact that the country recently abolished the death penalty. Mm-hmm. That was a key thing for the Vatican, and I think these are the elements that motivated them to hand him over.
Yeah. Now, President Kafando said that, during this confrontation between the army and the presidential guards at this particular camp, nobody died.
Nobody died, yeah.
Yes. So what have you heard from the people who may have been closer there? Is that the accurate report?
It looked like it's accurate because, a lot of people are asking questions, how is that possible after all this heavy gunfire, on Tuesday night, and everybody was afraid, staying at home, and according to what we have been hearing, a couple of hundred of soldiers were still in the camp. Some talked about some families still living in there, and so it was a surprise, maybe a good surprise that nobody died.
Now, what's the fate of the other soldiers? We know Diendérè has been detained.
Yeah.
What about the others?
We learned today from the army that 60% of the 1,300 RSP, the security presidential guards, 60% of them have surrendered, are now with the national army. And so there are still some who are in the loose, and hopefully they give them until the end of the day, because they have been affected to different camps across the country. Yeah. They gave them until the end of this Friday for everybody to get to a new base. If they don't, then they will be looked after.
Yes. In terms of the political situation in the country, we know that the presidential guard claimed they were staging this coup because of the exclusion of members of the former government in the elections that are upcoming. First, what is the possibility that the elections are going to take place smooth?
I think the election is going to take place soon because yesterday the U.S. Embassy in Ouagadougou urged the government to give a new date as soon as possible of the election. Same thing with the French Embassy. The European Union also pressed the transitional government to organize election as soon as possible. And these are the country funding the election. So I think President Kafando said they will be meeting in a couple of days with political leaders, with civil society. Together they will decide a date, and it will likely be in November.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the supporters of Compaoré, the former president, was that a general feeling in the population, or was this just a frustration of the presidential guard?
Okay, here's what we need to know. With the arrest of a general today, it's like the end of an era, because Compaoré, we know, left back in November 2004, but his armed wing, which is the RSP, stayed behind and was kind of the elephant in the room. All the reform that the transitional government was trying to do were in some way targeting them because there was a lot of judicial cases dating back to 15 years that involved presidential guard members, and no one could dare challenge them or call them to court. And because today general has been arrested, the camp has been dismantled, and probably, the judicial system can start moving, and the Compaorés party, Compaorés political partners are really isolated today, because some people were hearing what they were saying for being excluded, but because the cause has been defended by the coup leaders, it makes them really look bad, and it's really hard for people to feel sorry for them today.
Sure. Yeah. We hope for peace in that country. Bagasse, thank you very much for your insights.
Thanks.
Well, Bagasse Makori is a reporter with VOA's French to Africa service. Now, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban raised eyebrows when he said refugees and migrants flooding through the country are a potential threat to Europe's Christian values. Most of them are Muslim and fleeing war and poverty in Asia and the Middle East. Now, the comments ruffled Hungary's Muslim minority. Here's VOA's Danielle Schaff.
At least 5,000 refugees and migrants cross from Hungary to Austria every day, many seeking asylum from war and persecution back home.
So most of them are very tired, so you can see that they are tired, but also many are happy to be here in Austria, to have crossed the border to Austria.
Hungary has been less welcoming, determined to hold back the tide by erecting barriers along Serbia and Croatia to protect the European Union's borders. Europe's Christian values are at stake, says Hungary's Prime Minister, a sentiment that plays well at home, but not with everyone.
I'm a native Hungarian, and for me it's not a good thing to hear such comments, and I hope that the politicians don't mean it seriously, because this can undermine the structure or the peace in the society.
Playing up fears of Islam and migrants may give a boost of political support, but it also gives Hungary an image of intolerance.
This situation should be handled in a more calm, more quiet way, as we can see how Romania and Croatia deals with it.
Despite 2 centuries under the Muslim Ottoman Empire, there are fewer than 50,000 Muslims in mainly Christian Hungary. But it is prosperity, not intolerance, that drives Muslim refugees to settle elsewhere in Europe. Despite recent rhetoric, Hungary's Muslim leadership says they are well treated and integrated in this society. Daniel Scherf, VOA News, Budapest.
Now, Europe's migrant crisis was also on the minds of people in Irvine, California recently, as they rallied in support of all the world's displaced people. The march, led by some who came to the city as refugees, was called the Walk for Unity. VOA's Mike O'Sullivan has more.
A 3-kilometer walk drew attention to the world's 60 million people displaced by war and persecution. It was sponsored by the TIA Foundation, a refugee assistance organization whose name means "my love" in the Oromo language of northeastern Africa. The group taught many things to Aja Victor, who was granted asylum by the U.S. government.
How to get a job, and how to do the interviews, how to get into the community, and how to get involved in the non-profit, because I really wanted to be the kind of person who will be able to help people.
Maimouna Hussein Katan, whose family came to America from Ethiopia by way of a refugee camp in Somalia, says displaced people from many places come here.
Russia, Guatemala, Cuba, Congo, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, East Africa. It's a global crisis.
This Iranian, who was granted U.S. asylum, says the transition was difficult.
Because I want to be in my home. I want to be around my family. I want to be where I belong. But it was easy because in here, people are acting with respect. I see that we can respect each other.
Marcher Lori Margaret teaches interfaith student groups.
They're messaging me, texting me, and saying, what can I do? I don't have any money. I'm a high school student. What can I do to raise awareness, to help other people, to contribute, and to make a difference in the lives of refugees that are coming?
The United States will raise its annual refugee quota from 70,000 to 100,000 people by 2017 in response to the migrant crisis in Europe and increasing numbers of displaced people throughout the world. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Irvine, California.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. Check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vincent Makori. Well, coming up, an African-born film star lends her voice to the fight against HIV and AIDS prevention. Stay with us.
News and notes. This is Living Better.
Anemia, or a lack of iron in the body, leads to a reduction in the number of red blood cells, causing tiredness and other symptoms. To combat the problem, a Cambodian-Canadian venture is making a small, cheap iron fish to use inside of cooking pots. The lucky iron fish leaches small amounts of iron into the food and water while it cooks. Users say it helps how they feel.
I used to always feel very tired, but after starting to use the iron fish, bit by bit, I began having more energy.
Devot Haim with Lucky Iron Fish says the tool is made from recycled iron, costs about $5, and lasts for 5 years.
I hope that the lucky iron fish will swim around the world where there is an iron deficiency.
Lucky Iron Fish plans to go global with its product, providing an iron fish to about 1 million families over the next 5 years. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
Welcome back. Now, Lino Madu is off today. But in today's health report, South African-born film star Charlize Theron has issued a call to action for HIV and AIDS prevention. Speaking to a United Nations panel called Ending the AIDS Epidemic by 2030, Theron used startling statistics about the infection rates among young women and girls. The actress detailed stories from some young women and girls she has met. Theron, who is also a messenger of peace for the United Nations, called for increased funding for HIV and AIDS programs.
Stigma, lack of power, and support are impacting an entire generation of young people who are trying so hard to take control of their health and their future. This deadly combination of factors are the root of rising infection rates among young people, particularly young women in my country. It prevents them from getting the information and care they need to stay healthy. Imagine a young woman who says she would rather contract HIV than get pregnant because no one can see HIV, and so no one would shame her for being sexually active. Young people are the future, and for their sakes and ours, now is not the time to waver or turn back. It is time to act boldly on what we already know. It's time to end AIDS.
Now, during the panel hosted by Kenya and Malawi, HIV-positive 12-year-old Elijah Simel of Kenya shared his thoughts about how stigma is affecting him.
What really bothers me is stigma and discrimination. We are children, we have rights, and we have a future. My dream is that by the time I am 27 years old, there shall be no more stigma, and I shall be pursuing my doctorate or master's as a scientist.
That's good. Well, and that's our health segment for today. Lino Madu will return on Tuesday with our regular Africa 54 health report. What is time now for a short break? Still to come on Africa 54, a dizzying tourist attraction opens in China. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. China's first glass bottom suspension bridge is giving terrified tourists a heart-stopping day out. Now, the 300-meter-long crossing in China's Wuhan province dangles visitors 180 meters above a valley floor. The bridge has been attracting hordes of visitors since pictures of it went viral across Chinese media last week. Glass walkways are currently all the rage in China. The company that designed the bridge estimates that it's currently attracting around 3,500 visitors a day during the week and up to 15,000 on weekends. Now, next up, what's cooking? Well, creepy crawlies are worming their way into dinner menus in California. Crickets, stir-fried silkworm, and scorpions are the latest food trend at the Typhoon restaurant in Santa Monica. Fans are say they're creepy, crunchy, and benefit green living. Now, the Asian fusion-themed restaurant is part of a growing trend serving edible insects. The Gates Foundation and the United Nations are pushing to get insects onto our dinner plates. They call them a superfood that is particularly good for the environment. Well, and finally, smartphone manufacturers are strengthening touchscreen glass to better withstand dropping, bending, and falling objects. But then improvements are not leading to fewer broken phones. Why? As glass gets stronger, phones are getting bigger, thinner, and lighter, offsetting the improved strength. Using plastic is a possible alternative, but it's prone to scratching. Apple has received a patent for using internal motors to rotate a phone as it drops so that the glass part doesn't hit the ground. There's no word, though, on when we might see this in iPhones. That's what's trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. And for more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC and in the mornings. Today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us here in Washington. Have a good night.
Pope Francis makes an historic visit to America, and VOA is there.
Baba Mtakatifu Francis
presentes aquí en la Basílica.
The Pontiff's visit in the U.S. has elicited
Washington, Papa Francis and
Muchos abrazaron las palabras del Papa Francisco sobre
a couple of days for the Pope.
He's just one man here at Ground Zero.
The Pope comes to America, and you were there with VOA.